Karen Talamelli Cusick. I'm the Executive Vice President of ImpactWayv. Welcome to the latest in our ImpactWayv podcast series. ImpactWayv was designed to be a healthier and more meaningful alternative to the existing social media. Its function is to unite people, businesses, and nonprofits to accelerate their collective impact on a global social media platform. It's especially fitting today as we celebrate World Ocean Day. I'm able to welcome Doug Woodring, the founder of Ocean Recovery Alliance. Before I ask Doug to tell us a little bit about himself and Ocean Recovery Alliance, I'd like to point out a few notable awards and achievements of Doug. Doug was awarded the 2018 Prince's Prize for Innovative Philanthropy from Prince Albert of Monaco, is a United Nations Environment Climate Hero and a Google Earth Hero, and has been on the advisory board of the X Prize and the Economist World Ocean Summit. In 2011, Doug co-authored the United Nations Environment Program Yearbook chapter on the danger of plastic in the ocean, and is on the advisory committee of Wharton's Institute of Global Environmental Leadership. And I'm sure that's the short list. So Doug, it's a total thrill to have you joining me today. Really an honor. Could you please tell us a little bit about yourself and Ocean Recovery Alliance? And then I'd love to ask you some questions.
Thank you, Karen. Thanks for having me, and happy World Ocean Day. So for those of you who don't know, it's on June 8th every year. And I'd like to make a plug for the ocean. Some people say oceans, but in fact, there's only one ocean. There's only one body of water, and we all sit around that, and we all should take care of it. And for over 12 years now, we do all kinds of ocean protection work when it's needed, and I feel like we can make a difference, but mainly it's around plastic pollution. But sometimes overfishing, sustainable seafood, species protection, blue economy. In fact, I got my inspiration really from both sports, water sports, that I'm a big open water swimmer, water polo player, and outrigger canoe racer, and I still compete in all of these things. And I see stuff in the water more than maybe other people when they're on land. But also I worked for one of the biggest fishing companies in the world when I lived in Japan, just out of university, and I was the first gaijin, white person, working in that company trading seafood. And what I really learned was how much seafood the world pulls out of the ocean every single day. And it struck me that this is absolutely impossible to maintain. That was many years ago. Things have probably gotten worse, unfortunately. Many more big fishing fleets with more technology, fishing deeper waters and farther away unchecked. So that's how we all got started. And good to be here today to talk about some of these things.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. So actually, it's a great segue. So I was going to say, given your experience and focus working on ocean issues for over 12 years now, in your view, what are 3 or 4 of the main threats that the ocean faces?
Yes, well, there's a few big ones. Climate change causes warming of the ocean, also acidification. Those are tough for us as people to protect as individual citizens. The other big ones are pollution, much of which is plastic, and the overfishing, which I mentioned. So overfishing, that problem can be regulated, and plastic and the pollution is something we can all directly impact right away. And if you at least improve that, or those two, the ocean's resilience will be much stronger to then be able to deal with acidification and warming of the ocean. Acidification comes a lot from coal power plants and fossil fuel use. So as we digress from that kind of energy source and more to electricity, solar, wind, wave, hydrogen, whatever those are, there should be, less acidification happening in the ocean, but it's a long, clock. It doesn't happen overnight. So there's, 50-year half-life of CO2 when it's in the atmosphere. So we still have to go through all of that. Even if we stopped all of it today, we're going to have acidification issues that impacts shellfish and coral, and 25% of the world's ocean animals originate from coral reefs. So when the reefs are gone, the nest of all of these animals is also gone. And that's where all of our, marine life and fishing and sustainable livelihoods around coastal areas comes from. So we have to be careful with this whole chain of reactions.
And those, all of that does seem like far off and long term. But how do you think some of these might be solved if they can? And maybe what are some of the good stories that have given you hope? All you who continue to work in this space.
Yeah, well, on the fishing side, it is proven everywhere that when there are no take zones and controlled regions of taking of fish, exploitation of resources, the ocean comes back fast. I live in Hong Kong. I think one of the best things ever done in the last decades for anything environmental that the government of Hong Kong did is they banned bottom trolling in Hong Kong waters about 7 years ago. And that's when you bottom troll, you're basically taking a bulldozer through your front yard or your park every single day and not letting the bottom rejuvenate with life and mollusks, and then that brings the fish. Mm-hmm. When they stopped it, absolutely made a difference within 2 years. The sports people, the fishing people, everyone saw the fish. In fact, very interestingly, in the olden days, Hong Kong fishermen used to fish in China waters because there was more fish. Now the Chinese waters are overfished, and the Chinese encroach into Hong Kong waters. Unfortunately, Hong Kong is such a small little dot on the coast of the South China Sea that doesn't provide a lot of fish for too many of those big boats. Yeah. But plastic pollution is a huge angle where we can also make a difference. And finally, the ocean community is really looking at the rivers as sources of pollution. It used to be, and still often is, that the ocean related conferences and discussions, they don't talk about fresh water. And at freshwater conferences and discussions, they don't talk about the ocean. But of course, those two meet at some point, and it's the outflow not only of the plastic, but of nutrients from agriculture, pesticides from agriculture, which causes dead zones at the mouth, which is where the reefs are, and also, of course, industrial pollution. And those are two things we can really make a difference in. We have an app called Global Alert that lets you report trash hotspots anywhere in the world's waters. It's mainly meant for rivers and creeks, and we launched this 7 or 8 years ago, partly funded by the World Bank. It's in Spanish as well. But each community, each stakeholder in a watershed can go out and needs to know to look at this app and then manage it, put up booms and nets, catchment devices. The main thing is, if you think of rivers as blood vessels, think of the ocean as the heart, think of plastic as cholesterol. You don't want the plastic. It's much easier to catch the cholesterol going through the blood vessel, actually, before it gets to the heart, which is out into the ocean and gets dispersed. So in a river, it goes downstream one direction. You have two river banks, easy to get the surface material. And when you clean the surface of a river, it immediately changes people's thinking and pride about that river. They then say, wow, it's clean. Even if the water itself might be dirty and a little bit brown, you can fix that later, but you build the trust in the community by getting the surface layer of trash off, and then you can have bigger discussions.
Doug, I'm really glad you mentioned that. I mean, I've seen your work. I've watched the videos, and the Global Alert platform is one of only two platforms, I think, that were announced on a global scale for plastic waste reduction. I was reading about that, and it's so impressive because your programs exist without the need for bans, taxes, or legislative changes. I mean, when you create programs, you create them with the path of least resistance so that they could be enacted and on a scale large and small, so they could be replicated anywhere. I mean, you put the power in people's hands. So like you just said, they could see that. And it's just amazing. You take out the roadblocks. if you could speak to that, I mean, it's just amazing.
Yes, no, that's true. We in 2010, if you imagine that, we announced two of our biggest programs on plastic pollution at the Clinton Global Initiative. One was the Plastic Disclosure Project. That's a B2B and B2G platform methodology. It's the first methodology in the world created for plastic footprinting, much like that of carbon and water footprinting. Doesn't need any, as you said, bans, taxes, or legislative changes. Every Rotary Club in the world, every Chamber of Commerce, every university, airport, sports stadium, municipality could use this. But we were probably almost 10 years too early. The world wasn't ready to have the focus inward on themselves, looking in the mirror to say, how much do I use? How much do I recover? How much do I recycle in my products? And now that circular economy is a bigger discussion, you need to measure what you have. Otherwise, you don't know what to circulate. So this PDP, Plastic Disclosure Project, is now very valuable for companies and institutions and municipalities that want to just get a handle on what they do with their own site, with their own operations, with their own community. And then they can start thinking of where they can get rid of the low-hanging fruit and make big changes. Global Alert was the same. It's a bit like, we used Google Maps, but it's like the back-end platform of a mapping system. So now you can fly in to any creek or river and stream on this map, and your 8th grade class or even 6th grade or the retired community up the street can do reporting on the rivers and creeks. Even twice a month is more data than most municipalities get to show where the trash hotspots are, and then mobilize and think about how you can put up a boom or a net or a catchment device, which is regular, continuous cleaning and catchment on that creek or river throughout the whole year. Of course, sometimes the rivers might be low, they might be dry, but then you start to get seasonality metrics and understand that, hey, when the waters rise, that's when the stuff's going to be coming. So let's get ready. When it recedes, then you don't have that. But we've made the platform, but it's up to each local community to put 1 and 1 and 1 together to create 8, so that you have a stakeholder who can manage it, watch the reporting, have a school or university or some citizens go out and report, and then that knowledge gets used in the right way. And that's been our challenge, to be honest, because we don't have the bandwidth to run around to every creek and river and watershed around the world and teach people how to do this. We have all the methodology. We've done great stuff in Cambodia and Indonesia and other countries. So if anyone's interested, we can easily share that, because it's a super simple way to engage in a river system.
Oh, it really is. And I think that there's I have so much that I want to get into, so I'll try to stay on topic here. But, you are getting into quality of life, issues and environmental justice issues with that. I've seen your cleanup issues with this, the ocean, cleaning the ocean, and how it affects, these communities when the ocean goes in and leaves the trash. And it's the same thing that happens with these rivers, that, it just flows downstream into the most poor and distressed communities that don't need other people's trash with everything else that's going on. So these are useful tools that hopefully people.
Yeah, if I can comment on that, we actually believe that plastic pollution is more difficult to solve than climate change. Doesn't mean it's more impactful or dangerous necessarily than climate change, but it's just more complicated. There's thousands of types and versions of plastic that live in 7 families. But every day there's at least 2 billion people impacted by plastic pollution. And that is bad water, bad health, bad washing, drinking, agriculture, fishing, tourism. And that doesn't happen daily with climate change yet. So when you think that every piece of plastic left someone's hand before it became garbage, you think that we're one hand away from this solution. But sadly, the systems are not in place globally to put that material in the right place for all these different people. Even though they don't want to litter, they don't have the cities, municipalities don't have the right systems in place to fix that.
And, I was going to get that plastic is a big topic these days and is finally up there with climate change on the agenda. And that must be good news. But what does it mean? Is it as at least getting on kind of the front burner good, even though it seems like we've just discussed last minute, a massive challenge, but at least it's being
Well, no,
discussed.
you have to raise the awareness to be able to, get to the next step. So, like I said, we launched the Plastic Disclosure Project and Global Alert 10 years ago. We had to go kicking and screaming find a meeting with an office and a brand and a corporate and explain them to this. And they didn't want to hear about it many times. It was too scary for them because plastic was a primary part of their packaging and their products. Now we have people calling us to say, how do you fix this? How can we recycle better? How can we engage our community? We don't have to spend any more time trying to explain the rationale. So that is great. Everyone who knows about it, you jump right into the next steps and the solutions. We never used to link plastic with climate change in our discussions, and still we don't. They're too big for most people to absorb single-handedly, much less to combine them.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, because when someone is complaining about plastic in the water and they can't drink properly, they can't wash, bad for the tourism, they're not thinking about the CO2 impact and the climate change impact of that plastic when they have the physical issues right in front of them. But of course, as icing on the cake, when you do make all these improvements with less plastic pollution and more recycling, which means less energy use and less drilling for virgin material, you do have a good carbon impact. So now that is being brought into the COP discussions and the global environment, on the climate change, plastics being pulled into that. It's good in certain ways because now we can talk to the corporates and the governments who care a lot about climate change and say, well, plastic is a very big piece of that story, which you haven't really been talking about before because you've been talking about coal and energy and solar and wind and autos. So it's good.
Oh, that's good. Oh, I'm getting somewhere. Well, given the increased focus on plastic awareness, it seems strange, I guess, that recycling has come under fire in recent years for not living up to the expectations of the past few decades. Do you agree with the disillusionment about the recycling? And if some of the skeptics are correct, are there large-scale solutions for this issue?
Yes. It is sad that people are starting to say recycling doesn't work because there are really no other big options. Mm-hmm. You can't just get rid of plastic. You can't incinerate it. You don't want to just landfill it. You need to have recycling at scale for all the inventory and material that is out there in the world today. And that will continue to get made. You cannot have food packaging and autos and medical devices and computers and airplane parts without plastic. And when you try to reduce climate change impacts, you want to lightweight things, which means you use plastic and molding, and it's going to be around for a long time until someone invents the magic material that can dissolve in water with a push of a button, and we're not close to that anytime soon. So we need to have recycling. The real problem is our waste systems 30 years ago, 40 years ago, were not set up for plastic. They're set up for paper, glass, and metal. They do that well. Plastic is very difficult because of the reason I mentioned before. It's thin, it's pliable, it's lightweight, it gums up machinery. There's not a good market for it yet because it's too hard to unscramble the omelet. And what I mean there is a great analogy for recycling is the same as trying to reconstitute an omelet. If someone makes omelet for you with eggs, cheese, milk, and mushrooms and bacon, and they say, great, thanks for the omelet, put it all back in the original form for me. That's pretty much what recycling is. But it's also because we're not doing the right things at our municipalities. The colored bin system does not work usually. People can't walk or find the right bin for recycling. They're not big enough. They're not convenient enough. as soon as you pollute plastic with food waste, both good valuable materials go to zero value. Organics have value in the land and farming, but when there's plastic in that from the waste, means nothing. Vice versa. So we're pitching, even for big cities, the most change and dry. And it's very easy for everyone in any country, any language to understand wet and dry. The dry is paper, glass, metal, plastic, no grease, no chicken bones, no coffee, no Coke in it. Keep it dry. It doesn't have to be perfectly dry, but as soon as it's sorted that way, just 2 bags, then anyone in any system, whether it's hand sorting or optical sorting at a material recovery facility, they can recover that material in many, many 10 times more than what they're doing today. And that would then allow us to get recycling really to work, to be less costly, to unscramble that omelet because there's not all the food stuff stuck in it. And then you can have scaled, recycling that doesn't cost as much as it does today and can recover a lot more, get it out of our environment, get it out of the cities, create huge amount of jobs along the way. So it's not broken at all, but we've never given it the right chance.
Yeah, to be effective. Yeah, exactly. And that leads me to kind of my next one, because most large multinational brands do have significant goals to increase the use of recycled plastic in their products and packaging. But we've heard that it is hard for them to obtain the appropriate and the consistent supplies of the materials that they need to achieve those goals. And that seems like a mismatch for those who claim that the recycling doesn't work.
Right. Well, unfortunately, that's the challenge today. It's only the last 3 years. Again, circular economy pushes for brands to make commitments to use recycled content 20 to 30%. That's a lot of material when you look at all the big brands and where they export to and what they need for packaging and products. So that's, we estimate in the next 4 or 5 years, 6 million tons gap of recycled content, which is not available today, that needs to be found annually to supply the P&Gs and the Unilevers and the Cokes of the world with this material. So that's actually a huge opportunity. That's the big sucking sound the world needs to bring recyclers, innovators, entrepreneurs in to build machinery and equipment and grinding, shredding machines around the world to create a supply chain that can now feed this demand, which really did not exist even 4 years ago, for large scale quality, repetitive and consistent materials for use in manufacturing at big scale. And one of the log jams has been international regulation of trade. We have a Basel Amendment, which kicked in a year ago, which slowed down the movement of plastic feedstock across countries. Many countries don't exactly understand the rules and regulations, and the media has made it look like everyone's shipping around trash, which is not the case. In fact, when you can't move material from country to country, especially with plastic, you end up locking it into those countries, 90% of whom do not have the capacity to process it or absorb it in manufacturing. And that doesn't help anyone. So we need, the only way for a circular economy to work with plastic is a global circular economy, country to country to country processor, competitive advantage. It doesn't mean move things that are dirty, but it means bring those who are making some of the materials in smaller countries, get them up to speed with better cleaning systems, better grinders, shredders, and balers, but allow them to move those bales into countries that have the capacity to process it into pellets and then get it to the manufacturers and the brands who need it. So one pretty interesting thing is in the past, we mostly saw shipments of waste and recycled material from the west to the east or the north to the south. With the systems we're working on now with a new exchange called Rebound Plastic Exchange, we're trying to open the doors again through certification and verification of material and trust, so that you can move this needed feedstock between places in a legitimate manner. And that will create the feedstock supply that all these brands now are claiming they're going to meet in the next 5 years with their commitments, which today is pretty impossible under the exact supply chain system that we have today. So we're working on ways to solve that.
Well, that's wonderful, because you do hear so many stories where all of this recycled material gets shipped places and then just ends up just in these big landfills going nowhere. And that's pretty sad. Is there any communities, countries that are doing it right? I mean, is there a huge education component that needs to be
Well, a lot of this, a lot of this, as I mentioned, the waste systems are not necessarily set up the right way for today's world. Again, wet and dry is very simple. Mm-hmm. If you sort it from the very beginning from the house, it's easier for the material recovery people to get it and then move it into the system. Mm-hmm. So the material recovery facilities are really the ones we need to be upscaling, up training, up capacity building. It doesn't need to be super high tech, but a little bit better machinery, grinders, shredders, extruders. These are not super expensive, but most communities still don't have them. There's still a lot of corruption in the waste management world in many countries. They sometimes don't want more recycling because they have long-term contracts for landfill and they want to keep getting money for having the material come into their space. So that's something that we have to work around, everyone. But a lot of the changes are societal. Like I said, how do we collect better just at our house? How do we sort it better so that the pickup guys can do a better job of sorting when it's dry and easy? And so it's all possible. And we think this is going to bring a big amount of investment into communities and municipalities that can upscale their MRFs, which are the material recovery facilities, whether that's through hand sorting capacity or more mechanical and optical. So it's a big, exciting time actually in this space.
Well, when you talk about, different things that you don't hear much, but buzzwords like job creation, you don't hear about that much, but, you hear about it with other topics. But, that raises eyebrows. And, when you talk about these multinational companies who need this, and that's a disconnect, I think there needs to be some marketing and education in this. It's huge. And
it's huge. So when you look at the statistics, the recycling industry employs 10 to 15 times more people than the waste management industry. Generically with waste management, you need a truck driver, a guy who opens the gate, someone to pour the stuff in a hole, and that's 2 people. With the recycling, you need the people collecting it, sorting it, innovation in the machinery and equipment, reprocessing, new jobs with new materials and brands. And so when you think of this movement of shipment of material from south to north, the big brands are in the north. They're the ones who want the material, but they, many of them we've been exporting to countries all around the world, but most of these countries don't have the ability to recycle all those things, even though they're recyclable by design and by branding and by notification on a label. But the systems in all those countries are not there to actually recycle it. If we can do the better baling, the better MRFs, move it across countries, we can now get it to the processor and then the manufacturing facilities that the brands own that feed back to the north and those brands. So it's actually a pretty good story, and job creation will be a huge part of that. Not to mention the betterment of the environment and the communities, of all the communities that they serve.
Yeah, exactly. It's Definitely a win-win. I'm talking about a home run there. So the Basel Amendment you were talking about there, when the United Nations Environment Assembly Conference met in Nairobi in March, that unanimous international support for a plastic treaty will be negotiated at the end of March 2024. So where does that fit in the bigger picture of reduced pollution? This is exactly what we're talking about.
Right. So this was a big vote. All the nations, almost unanimously voted to approve a plastic treaty. That's very much like a climate treaty, Paris climate talks, but nothing's been negotiated on the terms yet. So that's the next 2 years of negotiation. Everyone wants, less material used, reduced pollution, of course, alternatives, but a lot of the things are in the form of taxes or negative negative incentives and decreased use and impact. What hasn't really been talked about is greatly increased recycling, which is what I was just talking about and what we're talking about, being able to trade. The momentum around psychology of a treaty is one of no trade, don't move material, plastic, every country fend for themselves. And that's really a backfire on the system. But our trading of this material cross-border in a global circular economy is completely complementary with anything that will come out of the plastic treaty, because they for sure will have needs and metrics for more recycling, more recycled content, and more circularity. So this all really fits into that plastic treaty discussion. It's just not in there in full force yet because people are thinking of decrease, stop, slow. And we have to also think increase and get that inventory of waste out there back into a repurposed form in some manner, which really can be done with a little bit changes here and there societally and capacity wise.
That's great. Switching gears a little bit, the Ocean Recovery Alliance takes part in so many incredible things. I mean, between the water rising, but you're in California now. You take part in ocean festivals and kids festivals in Hong Kong and California. Do you want to speak at all about some of the events that your team is?
Yeah, so we just talked a lot about business and government and policy, global angles, but we also do work on the ground with kids, students. We have a great program we've done for 4 years in Cambodia, twice a year, called the Water Rising and the Water Falling Festivals. That's because the Tonle Sap Lake, which is the biggest lake in Southeast Asia, it's Cambodia's inland ocean, rises and falls 18 to 20 feet once a year in a 6-month slow tide. And when the tide goes out, it brings the plastic out from the villages into the trees and the bushes and the lake. And when the lake rises, it brings it back in to the village. And the whole time it impacts the fishermen and the tourists because their propellers get stuck with plastic, and there's plastic in all the shrubbery and the fishing. And so with the communities that never had any waste management, they just burned it or put it in the water. Burning is another big thing that no one really talks about in the ocean plastic world. And it's actually estimated that 40% of the world's waste is burned, which means toxins in the air, carbon black, and respiratory issues in the location. If we get rid of that, that's a very big opportunity. So we have these festivals. We don't call them cleanups, but it empowers the monks, the fishermen, the village chiefs, the kids, high school villagers, and we do these every year. Now we've got 6 villages around the lake, and we're expanding. Want to have 20 in the next 3 or 4 years, and that to me has been an amazing thing because we started from zero, very under the ground, no publicity. Now we have support from the Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Tourism, local governor, and everyone wants to be part of this. So it's really exciting.
That's what it's so funny because we had been talking about that. You find the path of least resistance, apart from any permitting and legislation, and you get the community involved, and the legislature and government comes along because the people are taking charge of their own lives and communities and making the changes. That's been amazing.
Yeah, no, it's great. That's what inspires when you see these things work. You got to push the snowball off the hill and you got to get it rolling. And a lot of times people can't get it over the hill because you don't have the right mix of the stakeholders, the leadership, the volunteers, the site, some sponsor who has the vision. But once you put it all together, it's like 1 + 1 + 1 = 8. And now the momentum goes, and now people see this, how it can work. And they say, wow, I want to be part of that. I want to do that next year. I want to make it bigger. How can you do it in my country? We're now trying to replicate this in Kenya and Indonesia. Again, like you said, our programs can be really replicated anywhere. We have a play that we wrote for kids and villagers anywhere in the world because most people have roosters in their villages. And that's about the recycling rooster, tells them what to do. And the rooster is crowing all the way through, reminding the kids to recycle. And we have it in 8 languages now. We have it in Khmer and just launched one in Swahili in Kenya. So anyone who wants to perform this, it's a great way to bring the arts and the environment in a non-intrusive way with a great story. And when the rooster crows, "Cuckoo!" the kids remember in the morning when they hear it, they say to their mom, "Hey, where do we go recycle? Because I remember that play and the rooster's crowing, telling me to do that." So we call that eco repetition, where you have the sound of nature reminding people to do something positive every day. And we use the rooster as that tool.
And that's the other thing I've noticed. I mean, since we met about a year ago, I've seen. I mean, you're at conferences with several of these leaders of these multinational firms who are coming to you for advice on what to do on these recyclables and plastics. So you're advising heads of these companies and little kids with about clean oceans and recycling. So Ocean Recovery Alliance, I mean, it is spanning, literally the corporate leaders globally and children. I mean, that's pretty inspiring. I mean, I know we're coming, I guess, to our time, but as we close, how did you begin? I mean, what inspires you? You are basically taking on the globe. What continues to inspire you? And where do you find, I've heard of creative surprise?
Right. So creative surprise is what we like to use. It's sort of, as I explained, like we did in Cambodia, that we started. It was my idea there. I found a local partner who I trusted, and I could see that he was an entrepreneur like me, and he cared about the environment, and he could navigate the channels, like you said, the path of least resistance. We got the monks involved very early. That's very important in a Buddhist community because they have a lot of power and say. And then once we had their support, we felt very, very secure to be able to keep it, to expand this in a really good way. But the point of creative surprise is you bring people along into an environment almost like a theater, and they don't necessarily know that they're in the show. They don't necessarily know that they're part of the performance. But when the big bang comes, like we did last week in Los Angeles with 3,000 kids on the beach, and we spelled out the word joy, joy for nature, they don't know what they're in when they're on the beach making this art. And then they see the pictures and the images from a helicopter afterwards with this giant artwork, which we've done with sharks and turtles and dolphins in Hong Kong. And the kids see that and they start to cry. And they say, I was there, I was in the eyeball, I was in the tail. And some of those kids are now doing ocean protection and environmental protection stuff because that one event inspired them. But the corporates also then say, oh my gosh, that was great. We got great PR. Our employees loved it. We want to volunteer again. We want to expand this. So sometimes you have to lead them in when they don't know everything that might happen, and show them all the great stuff that comes out at the back end, and that's the surprise.
Doug, I thank you so much. It's funny you mentioned joy, because that's what I was just going to tell you, that thank you, because this has been a true joy for me to have you here. I thank you most sincerely for joining me. A true joy. I hope we could do this again.
Well, thank you, Karen, and thanks for all of your support there. It's great, your platform, and we look forward to seeing it expand at ImpactWayv, and a lot of good things can be done with the right magic between corporates and foundations and sponsors, and the world needs this kind of help now with all hands on deck. And we've proven a lot of good projects. We just need a bit more resources to escalate them and replicate.
Yeah. Well, it truly has been a joy, and we appreciate, you. We call you a founding member. You're an early adopter, and your faith in us is appreciated. So thank you. Thanks everyone for tuning in. If you enjoyed this conversation, please give us a like, and you could download our ImpactWayv app to continue the conversation. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Doug.
Bye.
Bye-bye.